The alien strategist studied our retreats. He could not find any. Part 1. Picture this. You are standing in a war chamber carved from black volcanic glass, 300 light-years from the nearest sun, and the most celebrated military mind in the known galaxy is slowly losing his sanity in front of you. His four eyes are not blinking in sequence anymore. They flicker, out of rhythm, out of pattern. For a pattern reader, that is the equivalent of a human surgeon's hands beginning to shake mid-operation. My name is Kessel Verne. I'm a senior archivist of the Vailter memory cult, and I have spent 41 cycles recording the campaigns of High Pattern Reader Othman Vale. I have watched him predict the collapse of the Skellen hegemony from a single intercepted supply manifest. I have watched him model the entire withdrawal trajectory of the brood colonies on a napkin made of dried fungus. I have watched him, on 3 separate occasions, win a war before the first shot was fired. I am watching him now. He is failing. The memory crystals around his command throne are humming at the wrong frequency. The lattice is overheating. I can smell the burnt mineral tang of overstressed prediction engines, that sharp dry odor like a struck match held too close to the face. 8 Concordat analysts in pale gray robes stand at their stations, refusing to look at him directly. They have learned in the last 40 days that meeting Othman's eyes when the crystals fail is dangerous. On the central display, a human fleet formation hangs in slow rotation. 17 ships. 3 of them are cruisers, the rest are converted freighters and 1 captured Concordat scout that the humans have, somehow, refitted with a forward-mounted slug thrower scavenged from a mining rig. The formation makes no sense. It is not a battle line. It is not a defensive sphere. It is not a withdrawal cone. It is something else, something my people would have classified as loitering, except that the humans have already destroyed 2 Concordat patrol wings from exactly this configuration. Othman has been studying this formation for 19 hours. He has not eaten. He has not slept. His ceremonial robes are stained with the milky residue of crystal coolant that he wiped from his own hands without noticing. The question I have been ordered to answer, in my official capacity as archivist of the combined Concordat, is this: how does the greatest pattern reader of our age lose to a species he cannot even map? The honest answer is the one I am no longer permitted to record in the official archive. I am recording it here instead, in the private crystal, the one I carry beneath my throat scales. He loses because he has spent his entire life learning to read the moment an enemy decides to run. And humans, as it turns out, never decided. Part 2. I was instructed, when I took this assignment, to record this campaign as a triumph. The directive came down from the High Concordat itself, 3 days before the fleet departed for the Karsh Expanse. The campaign was already considered a foregone conclusion. A small human colonial flotilla, isolated, outnumbered 9-1, stranded in a region of dead stars and asteroid graveyards with no resupply route and no reinforcements. The High Pattern Reader would crack them within a season. The archive would record another flawless victory, and Othman's name would be added to the eternal wall. What I have recorded instead is preserved here, in this crystal, unedited. If you are listening to this, you are likely a future archivist, perhaps even one of my own descendants assigned to clean the official record before it is sealed. I am asking you, before you scrub this entry, to listen. Listen to all of it. Because what happened to High Pattern Reader Othman Vale in the Karsh Expanse was not a defeat in any sense my people had a word for. It was something stranger. It was the moment our entire science of war discovered that there is, somewhere in the galaxy, a species that does not play the same game. I am still trying to understand what I witnessed. I think I will spend the rest of my life trying. This is what I saw. Part 3. To understand how far Othman fell, you must first understand how high he stood. 847 campaigns. That was the number engraved on the base of his command throne, refreshed after each new victory by a ceremonial scribe with a thin diamond stylus. 847 engagements against 43 different sentient species, and not a single loss. Not one. Not even a costly draw. Othman Vale was not a general in the way humans understand the word. He was a living instrument of pattern recognition, a mind so finely tuned to the rhythms of organized retreat that he could, in the words of his own teaching texts, hear the moment a species began to lose before the species itself knew it. His doctrine was elegant. Every civilized species, he taught, fights to a recognizable pattern, and every pattern, no matter how complex, contains a moment of inflection, the precise instant at which the formation shifts from forward pressure to rearward preservation. Identify that inflection point, and the war is over. You do not need to defeat the enemy. You need only to be standing where they are about to flee, with the gates already closed behind them. The skeleton retreat radially, in expanding hexagonal waves. The brood collapse inward, sacrificing their outer drones to preserve the queen ships. The Uyura execute spiraling withdrawals in groups of 7. My own people, the Vailter, retreat in nested spirals that mirror the inner architecture of our memory crystals. Othman knew all of these patterns the way a master musician knows scales. He could hum them. 17 archetypes. 4,000 years of compiled doctrine. Every conquered species in Concordat history had fit, eventually, into one of those 17 shapes. The humans were assignment number 44. The third colonial flotilla had been operating in the Karsh expanse for 6 standard years before the Concordat declared interest. They were not a military force in any formal sense. They were a frontier population, mining low-grade ores from Dead Star debris fields, running cargo between 3 uninhabited rocks they had optimistically named after old Earth cities. When the Concordat blockade fleet arrived, the humans had exactly 17 armed vessels, no shipyard, no resupply, and no allies within 40 parsecs. Othman spent 2 days reviewing the intelligence packet. He laughed once, a dry clicking sound from the back of his throat, and assigned the campaign a projected duration of 90 days. It is now day 412. The humans are still there. The blockade fleet has lost 46 ships. The humans have lost 2. And the first anomaly, the one that should have warned us, the one that I now believe Othman saw on day 6 and chose not to record, was this. The humans were not retreating. They were not even pretending to retreat. They were just there, and then they were somewhere else, and somewhere else was always, somehow, worse for us than where they had been before. Part 4. The Concordat science of pattern reading is 4,000 years old. It predates our spacefaring period. It predates, in some scholars' estimation, our species' transition to bipedalism. The earliest known pattern-reading text, the Tablet of Vareth, dates from a period in which my ancestors still hunted in cooperative packs on the surface of our homeworld, and the patterns it describes are the retreat formations of prey animals. This is the lineage I am asking you to understand. When Othman Vale studied an enemy fleet, he was not performing an academic exercise. He was performing an act of religious devotion, refined across 4 millennia, rooted in the deepest instincts of our species. To read a pattern of retreat is, for a Vailter, the highest expression of intelligence. It is how we became apex hunters. It is how we became conquerors. It is, in our most sacred texts, the act that separates the thinking from the merely living. 17 archetypes had been catalogued. Each one was beautiful in its own way. The skeleton radial pattern was studied in our military academies for its mathematical elegance, the way the expanding hexagons preserved unit cohesion under collapsing logistics. The brood inward collapse was admired for its terrible efficiency, the cold willingness to sacrifice 90% of a population to preserve 10. The Uyura spiral was almost musical, a dance of sevens that some Concordat poets had set to instrumental compositions. The humans fit none of these. The first reports from the Karsh expanse were dismissed by Othman's senior analysts as data corruption. The human ships, they said, must be retreating. The reports simply failed to capture the pattern. The sensors were old. The light from dead stars distorted long-range scans. The analysts requested better instruments and resubmitted the data. The new data showed the same thing. The humans were moving constantly, but their movements did not resolve into any of the 17 archetypes. They did not resolve into any combination of the archetypes. They did not resolve, in fact, into anything the prediction engines could classify at all. The crystals, faced with input they could not categorize, did what they were designed to do. They labeled the formation anomalous and requested additional observation. For 40 days, that was the standing assessment. Anomalous, awaiting clarification. On the 41st day, Othman convened his first emergency council. I was present, in my capacity as archivist, and I recorded the moment he asked the question that would, eventually, destroy him. Where, he said, is their withdrawal doctrine? The senior analyst, a thin Vailter named Prasen, bowed and said the question was being studied. Othman's 4 eyes, all of them, settled on Prasen at once. That is a deeply uncomfortable gesture among my people. It is the look a hunter gives prey it has decided to eat slowly. Find it, he said. Find their withdrawal doctrine. Find the captured documents. Find the training manuals. Find the staff college lectures. Find me, Archivist Prasen, the precise human word for the act of strategic retreat. Bring it to me by the next long cycle. Prasen bowed again and left the chamber. He returned the next long cycle, empty-handed, and reported that no such document existed in any captured human archive. Othman told him to expand the search. Part 5. The running joke among the junior analysts in the 3rd month of the campaign was that the missing human withdrawal document had become more famous than any document that actually existed. They had nicknamed it the Halcyon Manuscript, after the human commander, and they made small wagers about which raid would finally uncover it. Some of them, the bolder ones, kept tally marks on the inside of their station panels. Prasen has expanded the search 6 times. 6 tallies. 6 failures. The captured human archives by the 3rd month were considerable. The Concordat had taken 3 small outposts in the early weeks of the campaign, before the humans had fully understood what they were facing, and from those outposts the analysts had recovered thousands of data drives, personnel files, maintenance logs, recipe collections, training videos for operating heavy mining equipment. A surprising amount of recreational fiction, much of it about wars on Earth that had ended hundreds of years before the human colonization of the expanse. There were military documents. The humans were not careless. They had operational manuals for ship handling, for boarding actions, for damage control, for the maintenance of slug throwers and rail batteries, and the strange, almost charmingly primitive nuclear devices they still carried as area denial weapons. There were tactical doctrines, written in the dry, clipped prose of professional officers, describing how to engage a numerically superior enemy in confined space, and how to defend a static asset against a mobile threat. There was no document describing how to retreat. The analysts checked the indexes. They checked the cross-references. They checked the file headers and the metadata tags and the appendices and the footnotes. They ran semantic searches on every human language they had decoded, querying for terms that the Concordat military lexicon would consider equivalent to strategic withdrawal, general retreat, organized surrender of ground, preservation of force through disengagement, and 43 other related concepts. The searches returned thousands of results. None of them were what Othman was asking for. The humans had terms, of course. Prasen brought a list to the 4th Emergency Council, his scales pale with exhaustion. The humans, he reported, had a rich vocabulary for backward movement. They had fall back, which referred to short-range repositioning under fire. They had regroup, which referred to the consolidation of dispersed elements. They had withdraw, which the humans used almost exclusively in the context of removing a specific unit from a specific engagement in order to commit it to a different engagement. They had reposition, redeploy, displace, break contact, and a dozen others. None of these words, Prasen explained, mapped to the Concordat concept of strategic retreat. All of the human terms were directional. They described moving from one position to another in service of a continued operation. None of them described the act, sacred in our military doctrine, of ceding contested space in order to preserve force for a future decision point. The humans, Prasen said, did not appear to have a verb for that. Othman listened in silence. When Prasen finished, the high pattern reader's 4 eyes closed in sequence, slowly, the way they did when he was performing complex pattern analysis behind his inner lids. He remained that way for 19 minutes. The council waited. No one moved. When his eyes opened, he said only, "Expand the search." Prasen bowed and left. I recorded the moment in the official archive as a routine procedural directive. In my private crystal, I recorded something else. I recorded the precise quality of the silence in the chamber after Othman spoke. It was the silence of 8 senior analysts who had begun, for the first time, to understand that they were not looking at a missing document. They were looking at a missing concept. And no amount of searching was going to find a thing that had never been written, because the species that should have written it had never needed to. Part 6. The battlefield reports were the second thing to change. In the first month of the campaign, the reports had read like ordinary tactical updates. Engagement at Grid 743. Human formation broke contact at Vector 210. Concordat scouts pursued. Contact lost in debris field. 3 Concordat vessels damaged. Estimated human losses unconfirmed. By the 4th month, the reports had begun to develop a strange syntactic tick. The analysts had stopped using the word retreat entirely. They had stopped using withdrew. They had stopped, eventually, using any verb that implied the humans had moved away from anything. Instead, the reports described human movement as a series of relocations, each one described in purely geometric terms. Human formation translated 47 kilometers along the heading. Human formation rotated 30 degrees relative to the previous engagement axis. Human formation dispersed and reformed at coordinates beta 7. I asked Prasen one evening why the language had changed. He poured himself a cup of fermented root tea, drank half of it in a single swallow, and said, "Because every time we wrote that the humans retreated, the next report contradicted it." He explained. The Concordat doctrine of pattern reading depended on a fundamental assumption, which was that retreat and attack were distinguishable phases of an operation. A force that retreated was, by definition, a force that had ceased to attack. A force that attacked was, by definition, not in retreat. The two states were mutually exclusive. They had to be, because the entire architecture of pattern reading was built on identifying the transition between them. The humans, Prasen said, did not respect this distinction. He gave me examples. In month 2, a human cruiser had broken contact with a Concordat patrol wing at the edge of a debris field. The analysts had logged this as a retreat. 6 hours later, the same cruiser had emerged from the far side of the debris field, accompanied by 2 human freighters that had been hidden inside, and had destroyed the Concordat patrol wing from a flanking angle. The retreat had been a setup. The break in contact had not been a cessation of attack. It had been a continuation of attack, expressed through movement. In month 3, a human formation had pulled back from a contested asteroid cluster under Concordat pressure. The analysts had logged this as a retreat. The humans had spent the following 11 hours rigging the cluster with proximity mines scavenged from their own damaged hulls. When the Concordat fleet moved to occupy the abandoned position, 4 of our ships were destroyed in the first minute. The retreat had been a delivery mechanism for a trap. In month 4, a human ship had appeared to flee a Concordat destroyer, leading it in a long, curving chase across 2 parsecs of empty space, only to vanish into a gravitational anomaly that the human captain had clearly known about and the Concordat captain had not. The destroyer was crushed. The retreat had been bait. Every time the analysts wrote that the humans had retreated, Prasen said, the humans had then done something that proved the word had been incorrect. So they stopped using the word. The reports by the 5th month were written in a kind of clinical geometry, describing human movement without ever assigning intent to it. Translation, rotation, dispersal, reformation. The humans were treated in the official Concordat archive as a weather pattern, a thing that moved, a thing that you tracked, a thing that you did not under any circumstances attempt to predict. Othman read these reports every morning in his volcanic glass chamber, with a cup of fermented root tea cooling beside him. He had stopped drinking the tea, I noticed, around the same time the reports had stopped using the word retreat. Part 7. I was granted access to the intercepted human transmissions in the 6th month, when Othman ordered the linguistic division to expand their analysis to include human command traffic. The transmissions were sparse. The humans broadcast very little, and what they did broadcast was heavily encrypted, but the Concordat had broken 3 of their cipher rotations in the early weeks, and we had a small library of decoded command-level communications. Most of them were operational, course corrections, damage reports, supply allocations. The humans were running their flotilla by Concordat standards on impossibly tight margins, and a significant fraction of their internal traffic was simply the daily arithmetic of survival. There was one transmission, however, that the linguistic division had flagged for command review. It was a short address, given by Commodore Myra Halson to her assembled captains on the eve of an engagement in the 2nd month of the campaign. The recording was of poor quality. There was background noise, the hum of overstressed life support, the occasional distant clang of something being repaired in an adjacent compartment. Halson's voice was clipped and dry. She sounded, to my untrained ear, almost bored. The address was 4 sentences long. We're going to engage at grid 472 in approximately 90 minutes. The Concordat will expect us to break contact along the standard withdrawal axis and try to disengage through the debris corridor. We don't have anywhere to go, so we may as well go forward. Captains, prepare your crews. That was the entire transmission. Othman listened to it 7 times. I counted. He sat in his command throne with his 4 eyes closed and the recording playing on a low loop, and he listened to it 7 complete times before he opened his eyes and ordered the linguistic division to find the hidden meaning. The linguistic division spent 11 days analyzing the transmission. They examined Halson's vocal stress patterns, her word choices, her phrasing, her pauses. They cross-referenced her speech with every other recorded sample of her voice. They consulted Concordat experts on human rhetorical traditions, on military oratory, on the cultural conventions of pre-battle addresses across 43 sentient species. They reported back to Othman with a 30-page analysis. The conclusion of the analysis, written in the careful formal prose of senior linguists, was as follows. The transmission did not contain a hidden meaning. Commodore Halson had said, with no apparent subtext, that her flotilla had nowhere to retreat to, and that therefore they would advance into the engagement instead. The transmission was not a deception. It was not a coded message. It was not a feint designed for Concordat interception. It was, the linguists wrote, almost certainly authentic, because no human commander attempting to deceive an enemy would have phrased her intent with such transparent clarity. She had simply told her captains the truth. The truth was that she did not consider retreat to be an option, not for tactical reasons, but for grammatical ones. The verb did not exist in her operational vocabulary. When she looked at the battlefield, she did not see a choice between advancing and retreating. She saw a choice between advancing and standing still. And standing still, in the Karsh expanse with no resupply and no reinforcements, was a slow form of dying. So she advanced. Othman read the analysis twice. Then he stood up from his command throne, walked to the wall of his chamber, and pressed his forehead against the cold volcanic glass. He remained that way for some time. I do not know how long. I had been ordered to leave the chamber when he stood, and I did not see his face again until the following long cycle. When I did see him again, the fourth eye on the left side of his head was no longer blinking in sequence with the other three. Part 8. The decision to starve them out was made in the 7th month. Othman convened a full strategic council and presented his reasoning, which was, by Concordat standards, sound. The humans were operating without resupply. They had no shipyard, no manufacturing base, no allied fleet within 40 parsecs. Their consumables were finite. Their munitions were finite. Their ship-grade alloys, their reactor fuel, their water, their atmospheric reserves, all finite. The blockade would be tight. The remaining trade lanes, such as they were, would be closed. The Concordat fleet would not engage. It would simply wait. In 90 days, Othman calculated, the humans would be physically incapable of continued operations. They would have to surrender, or they would die in their ships, and either outcome would end the campaign. The blockade held for 90 days. The humans did not retreat. They did not surrender. They did not die in their ships. What they did instead was something the Concordat analysts would spend the next several years trying to categorize and would ultimately fail to fit into any existing framework. The humans began to consume themselves, not in the metaphorical sense, in the literal sense. They stripped their own damaged vessels for parts and welded them into their functional ones. They tore the internal bulkheads out of their own crew quarters and used the alloy to patch hull breaches. They cannibalized non-essential systems. They cannibalized essential systems. They cannibalized, at one point, an entire freighter, reducing it across 11 days to a hollow shell of structural ribs, while its former contents were redistributed across the rest of the flotilla. The reports described human crews sleeping in corridors because their quarters no longer had walls. They described meal rations cut to a third, then a quarter, then less. They described the slow disappearance of human civilian vessels from the flotilla, one by one, as their crews were reassigned to military ships and their hulls were broken down for raw materials. The humans were not preserving anything. That was the part the analysts could not understand. In every other species the Concordat had encountered, prolonged siege produced a characteristic behavioral signature. The besieged force would begin to preserve. It would hoard rations. It would protect its remaining functional vessels. It would reduce activity, conserve fuel, ration ammunition. The siege would produce, in the besieged force, a posture of crouched survival, an instinct to last as long as possible in the hope that something would change before the end. The humans did not crouch. They burned through their reserves as fast as they could productively use them. They expended ammunition aggressively whenever the Concordat fleet came within engagement range, despite having no way to replace it. They ran their reactors at higher than rated output, despite having no spare reactors. They behaved, in short, as though they had no intention of preserving anything for a future in which the situation might improve. I asked Prasen, late in the 8th month, what he thought the humans were doing. He had aged visibly during the campaign. The scales around his throat had begun to dull, and his secondary eyelids no longer fully retracted. He looked at me for a long time before he answered. "I think," he said, "that they are not preserving anything because they do not believe they are going to retreat. And if you are not going to retreat, there is no future in which preservation matters." I asked him what they were doing instead. He said they are spending themselves to kill us, as fast as they can, until either we leave or they run out. I asked him what would happen when they ran out. He did not answer. Part 9. Othman stopped sleeping in the 9th month. I do not mean that he slept poorly, or that his rest was disturbed by the demands of command. I mean that he stopped sleeping. The Vailter require approximately 6 hours of deep crystalline rest per long cycle in order to maintain neurological function, and Othman, by the second week of the 9th month, was averaging less than 1. He spent the remaining hours in his command chamber, in front of the rotating display of human formations, with the prediction engines running at full power and producing no usable output. The chamber smelled, by then, of burnt mineral and something else, something organic and sour, the smell of a Vailter body operating past its limits. I attempted twice to suggest that he allow a junior officer to take temporary command while he rested. The first time, he did not appear to hear me. The second time, he turned his head very slowly, looked at me with 3 of his 4 eyes, and asked me to leave. The fourth eye, the one on the left, was no longer pointed in the same direction as the others. It was tracking something I could not see. I left. In the long cycles that followed, I observed him from a distance. The chamber became a kind of shrine to his deteriorating method. The walls were covered with projected analyses, each one an attempt to fit human movement into one of the 17 archetypes. None of them resolved. The crystals on his command throne were cracked in 3 places where he had struck them with his clawed hand. The ceremonial scribe who maintained the campaign tally on the base of the throne had stopped coming to the chamber, because there were no new victories to record, and the existing tally felt, in context, like a mockery. I want to be precise about what I am describing. Othman Vale was not a foolish commander. He was not a weak mind, or a coward, or a man broken by ordinary stress. He was, by any measure my civilization could apply, the most accomplished strategist of the modern era. He had spent his entire life perfecting a single skill, and that skill had been, until the Karsh expanse, the most reliable instrument of conquest the Concordat possessed. What was breaking him was not stress. It was something deeper and more specific. It was the slow recognition that the skill he had built his life around had a single, fatal limitation, and that limitation was now being exploited by an enemy that did not even know it was exploiting it. The humans were not trying to defeat his method. They were simply operating in a way to which his method did not apply. He could not adapt, because there was nothing to adapt to. He could not counter, because there was nothing to counter. He was, for the first time in 847 campaigns, facing an enemy whose behavior could not be modeled, predicted, or anticipated by the only tools he had. He did what any expert does when the tools fail. He used them harder. He ran the prediction engines longer. He demanded more data, finer analyses, deeper searches. He convened councils and dismissed them. He ordered the linguistic division to recheck the Halcyon transmission an 8th time, a 9th, a 10th. The transmission did not change. Neither did the analysis. The humans had nowhere to go, so they were going forward. In the 3rd week of the 9th month, I stood outside the door of the command chamber and listened to Othman speak to the crystals. He was making predictions. I could hear him through the door, in the dry clicking cadence of formal pattern reading, the way a senior practitioner intones the predicted vectors of an enemy retreat. He was reciting the 17 archetypes, one after another, applying each in turn to the latest human formation, and asking the crystals to confirm. The crystals were not responding. I knew this because I could hear no answering hum. He recited all 17 archetypes, then he started again, then again. I stood at the door for a long time. I did not enter. That, I think, is the moment I should have recorded in the official archive. Not the battles, not the casualty figures, not the dates of the engagements or the names of the lost vessels. That moment, with the high pattern reader of the combined Concordat alone in a chamber of cracked crystals, reciting the patterns of retreat to an enemy that did not have one. I did not record it. I am recording it now. Part 10. The Battle of Thren's Drift took place on the 412th day of the campaign. Othman had been planning it for 6 weeks. The plan was, by his own standards and by the standards of every Concordat strategist who would later study it, a masterwork. A triple envelopment, executed across 3 engagement zones, designed to compress the human flotilla into a single narrow channel between 2 debris fields and the gravitational shadow of a dead neutron star. The humans, when they encountered the closing jaws, would have exactly one viable escape vector. They would take it, because every species the Concordat had ever encountered took the viable escape vector when offered, and they would emerge into a kill zone that Othman had prepared with 43 ships and a minefield seeded over the preceding 11 days. It was, in every technical respect, a perfect trap. The Concordat war colleges still teach it. They teach it as an example of theoretical excellence, of doctrine executed without error, of every variable controlled and every contingency anticipated. They teach it also as the engagement that ended the career of high pattern reader Othman Vale, and they teach the moment of its failure as a kind of cautionary parable, although the parable is told differently depending on who is teaching it. This is what happened. The jaws closed on schedule. The human flotilla, 16 ships by that point, with one of the original cruisers lost to reactor failure in the 11th month, was compressed into the narrow channel exactly as Othman had predicted. The viable escape vector opened in front of them, exactly where Othman had placed it. The minefield in the kill zone was armed. The 43 ships of the ambush force were in position. Every prediction engine in the chamber confirmed the geometry. The crystals, for the first time in months, hummed in clear resolution. The humans did not take the escape vector. They advanced into the closing jaws instead. I was in the chamber when it happened. I watched Othman's 4 eyes follow the human formation as it accelerated, not toward the opening he had prepared, but directly into the heaviest concentration of his own forces. The formation did not break. It did not disperse. It did not even attempt to mask its trajectory. The humans simply pointed their ships at the strongest part of the Concordat line and went forward. And as they went forward, Commodore Myra Halson broadcast her second and final transmission on open Concordat frequencies. It was 8 words long. "You built a door, we don't use doors." The transmission was broadcast in clear, in the Concordat trade language with no encryption. Every ship in the engagement zone heard it. Every analyst in the command chamber heard it. Othman heard it, and his 4 eyes, all of them at once, closed. The human flotilla struck the center of the Concordat line at full acceleration. The geometry of the engagement, which had been designed to herd them toward the kill zone, now worked against the herders. The ambush force on the far side of the channel was out of position. The minefield was useless, seated along a vector the humans were not using. The 2 flanking formations could not redeploy in time. The center of the Concordat line, which had been the heaviest concentration of ships but had not been arranged for direct frontal combat, took the entire weight of the human advance. Othman's flagship was at the center of the line. I am told the engagement lasted 19 minutes. I do not remember most of it. The chamber's external feeds went dark approximately 7 minutes in, when the relay station coordinating the ambush was destroyed, and the rest of the battle was reconstructed afterward from the few surviving Concordat vessels. The human flotilla punched through the center of the line, sustained heavy losses doing so, and emerged on the far side with 11 ships still operational. The Concordat ambush force, scattered and out of position, never reformed. The blockade, which had held for 14 months, collapsed in a single afternoon. Othman Vale was not among the recovered. The Concordat declared him lost with full honors. The Eternal Wall received his final entry, and the campaign tally on the base of his command throne was sealed at 847 victories and 1 defeat. The defeat was attributed, in the official record, to anomalous enemy behavior and extreme environmental conditions in the Karsh expanse. The official record did not mention Commodore Halson's transmission. It did not mention the missing withdrawal document. It did not mention, in any of its 47 volumes, the word retreat. I was assigned, as senior surviving archivist of the campaign, to prepare the final report. I have been working on it for 11 years. It is, by Concordat standards, severely overdue. The report is largely complete. The casualty figures have been verified. The engagement diagrams have been drafted. The doctrinal analyses have been written and rewritten and submitted for review and returned for revision and submitted again. The vast architecture of the campaign has been reconstructed in fine detail, every ship accounted for, every decision recorded, every order traced from its origin to its execution. There is one section that remains incomplete. The Concordat report format, established 4,000 years ago and unchanged since, requires every campaign archive to contain a section titled Analysis of Enemy Withdrawal Doctrine. The section is mandatory. It cannot be omitted. The report cannot be filed, sealed, or entered into the permanent archive without it. I have left the section blank. I have tried on 3 occasions to write it. I have sat at my desk in the High Archive of Voreth, with the campaign record spread before me and the cursor blinking in the empty field, and I have not been able to compose a single sentence. The doctrine I am asked to analyze does not exist. The withdrawal it describes did not occur. The patterns I am asked to identify are not present in the data, because the data is a record of a species that does not, in any sense my civilization has a word for, retreat. I have stopped trying. The report sits in my workspace, complete except for one blank section, and I have decided, in my 41st cycle as senior archivist of the Velter memory cult, that I will leave it that way. The blank section is, I now believe, the most accurate analysis I am capable of producing. It is the only honest answer to the question the report is asking. There is no human withdrawal doctrine. There never was. The species we fought in the Karsh expanse did not have one, and our long defeat was not the result of any tactical brilliance on their part, but of the slow and terrible discovery that our entire science of war had been built around a single assumption that turned out, in the presence of the right enemy, to be wrong. I think about Othman Vale often. I think about him alone in his chamber in the 9th month of the campaign, reciting the 17 archetypes to crystals that would not answer. I think about the moment he understood, if he understood it before the end, that the skill he had built his life around had not failed him. It had simply met a species to which it did not apply. And I think sometimes about a recording I am not supposed to have. It was made by a junior officer aboard one of the surviving ambush vessels at Thren's Drift, in the long minutes after the engagement ended, when the Concordat survivors were still searching the debris for Othman's flagship. The recording is of the High Pattern Reader's final transmission, sent on a private channel that the junior officer was not authorized to monitor. It is the last thing Othman Vale said before his ship was lost. He said it quietly. He said it to no one. I studied their retreats. I could not find any. The recording is 12 seconds long. The remaining 11 seconds are silence. I have listened to it many times. I have it preserved in the same private crystal where I am recording this entry, the one beneath my throat scales, the one no future archivist will be permitted to scrub. I keep it there because I want at least one record of this campaign to be honest about what it was. We did not lose to a clever enemy. We lost to an enemy whose language did not contain the word we needed them to say. We lost to a species that, when offered a door, looked at the door and did not understand why the door was there, and went forward instead. So if you are listening to this, future archivist, and you are preparing to seal the official record of the Karsh campaign, I am asking you to consider one final thing before you do. Somewhere in the galaxy, there is a species that does not have a verb for giving up. They are not, by any measure I can apply, a wise species, or a peaceful one, or a particularly admirable one in many of the ways my own civilization values. They are stubborn. They are reckless. They spend themselves at terrible rates, and they do not preserve, and they do not crouch, and they do not run. But they cannot, in any way our 4,000-year-old science can model, be defeated by being made to retreat. Because they do not. And the next time the Concordat sends a pattern reader to model their behavior, I hope, in whatever quiet way an old archivist is permitted to hope, that the pattern reader will read this record first, and will understand before the ships are launched and the crystals are tuned and the 17 archetypes are loaded into the prediction engines, that some doors are not built to be used. Some doors are built so that, one day, a species that does not understand doors can walk through the wall instead. I am Kessel Verne. I was the chronicler of High Pattern Reader Othman Vale. This is my final entry on the Karsh campaign. The retreat analysis section is blank. It will remain blank.